The diner was a small place with a warm, familiar smell of coffee and baked goods that wrapped around everyone the moment they stepped in. The walls were decorated with faded photographs of the town in its younger days, and the chairs were the kind that creaked softly when you sat down. It was busy that morning with the clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversations, and the occasional laughter from customers who had become regulars. Behind the counter, the waitress moved with practiced ease, carrying plates of pancakes and cups of coffee. Her apron slightly wrinkled but her smile bright and genuine. She had been working at the diner for several years. She knew most of the faces that came through the door, and she always tried to remember their favorite meals and drinks. Some came in just for a chat, some for the food, but everyone was treated with the same kindness. On this particular morning, she noticed a man sitting alone in a corner booth. He looked older than most of the customers she served. His hair was thin and gray, and his eyes carried a tiredness that spoke of years filled with stories he hadn't shared. He wore a worn coat that seemed to have seen better days, and his hands rested on the table as if he needed the support of something solid in the world. She watched him quietly for a moment, noticing the slight slump of his shoulders and the way he stared out the window, as if he were remembering something far away. There was a sense of quiet dignity about him, a presence that was hard to ignore. Something in her heart told her that this man deserved a little kindness. Without thinking too much, she prepared a cup of coffee, the kind he seemed to be reaching for but hadn't ordered. She poured it carefully, the dark liquid steaming in the cup, and carried it to his table. "Good morning," she said softly, placing the cup in front of him. "I thought you might like this. On the house." The man looked up, startled for a moment, and then a faint smile spread across his face. His eyes, tired as they were, lit up just slightly, like a small sun breaking through a clouded sky. He didn't say anything right away, just nodded, his fingers brushing the edge of the cup. There was a moment of quiet between them, a simple human connection that didn't need words. She could see a hint of gratitude in his eyes, a flicker of warmth that made her chest feel light. The other customers glanced at the scene, some raising eyebrows, others smiling. They recognized the waitress's gesture for what it was. A small act of kindness that made the room feel a little warmer, a little more human. The man took a slow sip of the coffee, savoring it as if it were more than just a drink. She watched him, feeling a quiet satisfaction in her heart. It wasn't about recognition or reward. It was about doing something good because it felt right. As she returned to the counter, her mind wandered to the many times she had done similar things. She remembered the single mother who came in every Thursday and struggled to pay for her meal, the elderly couple who always shared a piece of pie but never ordered enough to make it worth the effort, and the shy teenager who came in after school, trying to hide the troubles he carried at home. Each act, no matter how small, had made a difference in someone's day. Today was no different, she thought. Today was just another chance to be kind. The man sat quietly, drinking his coffee, and the diner continued its usual rhythm around him. Plates were washed, orders were shouted, and conversations flowed. The waitress moved from table to table, making sure everyone was taken care of. She asked about their families, laughed at their jokes, and shared in their small moments of joy. Yet, in the back of her mind, she couldn't stop thinking about the man in the corner booth. There was something about him, something that made this moment feel significant even though it seemed ordinary. After a while, he looked up and gave her a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that he had noticed her gesture and appreciated it. She smiled back, feeling a sense of quiet fulfillment that didn't need to be expressed in words. It was a simple human exchange, a reminder that even in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving, there were moments of connection that could make everything seem a little lighter. The morning wore on, and the diner became busier. The waitress moved with grace and efficiency, juggling orders and conversations, yet she never forgot the old man and the small cup of coffee she had given him. She felt a strange sense of hope, a belief that perhaps small acts of kindness could ripple out in ways she couldn't yet see. Maybe today, something good would come of this simple gesture, or maybe it would just be a fleeting moment of warmth in a busy world. Either way, she knew she had done the right thing. As the man finished his coffee, He carefully set the cup down and looked around the diner. There was a quiet dignity in the way he carried himself, a subtle recognition of the waitress who had made his morning a little brighter. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a few coins and left them on the table. It wasn't much, but it was a gesture of gratitude, a silent thank you for her kindness. She noticed it as she walked by and gave him a small wave, her heart feeling lighter for the connection they had shared. The rest of the morning passed in its usual way, with customers coming and going, orders being filled, and conversations drifting through the air. Yet, for the waitress, the memory of that small moment with the old man lingered, a quiet reminder that even the smallest gestures could carry meaning. She continued her work, smiling at each customer, pouring coffee, and sharing in their lives in small, meaningful ways. The diner, with all its noise and warmth, felt like a little world where kindness could still find a place. By the time the lunch crowd started to arrive, she had nearly forgotten the simple cup of coffee she had given away. But the memory of the old man's eyes, the faint smile that had touched her heart, stayed with her. It reminded her why she did what she did every day, why she treated people with care and attention, even when no one was watching. Life was full of moments like this, she thought, small acts that mattered more than they seemed, and sometimes those moments had a way of coming back in ways you could never expect. The afternoon passed in a blur. The diner had quieted down from the morning rush, and the waitress found herself wiping tables and refilling coffee cups with a mind that kept drifting back to the old man and his faint, grateful smile. She felt a sense of satisfaction that warmed her chest, a quiet glow that reminded her why she chose this line of work. She had always believed that small acts of kindness mattered, even if they seemed unnoticed in the moment. Little did she know that this simple choice was about to have a much larger impact. The door to the diner opened with a chime, and the manager appeared from the back office, his expression serious. He had always been strict about the rules, insisting that every transaction be paid for, that no exceptions were made. He walked up to the waitress, his eyes scanning her face, looking for an explanation. She paused mid-step, holding a coffee pot, and straightened her posture. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. She nodded, setting the pot down carefully. Inside, a small knot of anxiety formed in her stomach. She had a feeling she knew why he wanted to speak with her, but she tried to stay composed. They moved to the office, a small room tucked behind the kitchen with a worn desk and a stack of paperwork. The manager gestured for her to sit, and she did, trying to steady her breathing. He leaned against the desk, folding his arms, his expression a mix of concern and authority. "I heard about the coffee you gave to that gentleman this morning," he began. "You know our policy. We can't give away food or drinks for free. It's a violation of our rules." She felt a flush of embarrassment and disbelief. "I know, but I didn't think it would be a big deal." He seemed like he really needed it. "I understand your intentions," he said, his tone softening slightly. "But rules are rules. We have to be fair to all our customers and maintain consistency. I'm afraid I have to let you go." Her chest tightened, and her mind raced. She had expected perhaps a warning, maybe a conversation about following policy more closely, but being fired felt harsh and final. She tried to find words, a way to explain herself, but nothing seemed adequate. The manager's expression left no room for debate, and she realized this was the end of her time at the diner. She left the office quietly, her apron still slightly wrinkled, her hair falling into her face. The noise of the diner seemed louder now, sharper somehow, as if it were mocking her. She walked out the door, the bell above chiming softly, and stepped into the crisp afternoon air. The sky was bright, the sun reflecting off the pavement, but she hardly noticed. Her thoughts were tangled with disbelief and frustration. She had acted from the heart, yet now she was paying the price. As she walked down the street, she passed by neighbors and familiar faces. Some waved, unaware of what had just happened, and she managed small smiles, though they felt forced. Her mind kept replaying the morning's event, the old man's smile, the moment of quiet connection. She wondered if it had been worth it, if one small act of kindness could really lead to such consequences. The weight of the unfairness pressed down on her, making every step feel heavier than the last. She found a small bench by a park nearby and sat down, letting her hands rest in her lap. She thought about her family, her friends, and all the people who had relied on her to brighten their days. She had always prided herself on treating everyone with respect and care, and it hurt to feel that same care had been met with punishment. Tears threatened to fall, but she held them back, refusing to give her sadness free rein. Instead, she focused on the memory of the old man, on the faint warmth that had touched her heart earlier that morning. Meanwhile, back at the diner, the atmosphere had shifted. Regular customers noticed her absence, and whispers began to circulate. Some people were sympathetic, others confused, but everyone agreed that the action seemed harmless, even kind. The staff went about their tasks, but there was a subtle tension in the air, a recognition that something significant had occurred. The story of the fired waitress began to spread quietly, carried by curious patrons and concerned neighbors, though no one knew what the outcome would be. The waitress wandered through the streets, lost in thought. She passed by shops and cafes, each window reflecting a world that seemed both familiar and distant. Her mind kept circling back to the diner, to the old man, to the small moment that had set off this chain of events. She wondered if she had made a mistake, if her kindness had been naive, if the world really worked in such a way that good deeds could lead to punishment. It was hard to reconcile the warmth of her intention with the cold reality of consequences. As the afternoon wore on, she returned home, her steps slow, her heart heavy. She sat in her small apartment, a simple space with a few personal touches that made it feel like home. She poured herself a cup of tea, trying to soothe the tension in her shoulders, and stared out the window at the city beyond. The streets were busy, people rushing to their destinations, unaware of the quiet struggle she carried inside. She thought about what she could do next, how she would find work, how she would move forward, but the uncertainty felt overwhelming. Late that evening, she received a message from a friend, asking if she was okay. She typed a brief reply, keeping her emotions in check, but the words felt hollow. Her friend could not understand the depth of her disappointment, the sting of injustice. She lay down that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the morning in her mind. Every detail, every glance, every small gesture seemed magnified, and she wondered if the world was truly as fair as she had believed. The days that followed were quiet but tense. She applied for new jobs, each interview leaving her anxious and wary. She recounted her experience to potential employers carefully, careful not to sound bitter or resentful, though the hurt was real. Yet, despite the challenges, she held on to a quiet hope, a belief that her act of kindness had not been in vain, even if the world had responded with punishment instead of gratitude. In the diner, life continued, but the absence of the waitress was felt. The old man never returned during that week, leaving a void that customers and staff noticed. There was a subtle sense that something had shifted, that the world had missed a small, important moment of humanity. Yet, no one could predict what would happen next, or how the story might turn in unexpected ways. For the waitress, each day was a mixture of reflection, hope, and quiet resolve, as she navigated the consequences of a choice made from the heart. A choice that had been simple, kind, and yet profoundly transformative in ways she could not yet see. The elderly man walked slowly down the quiet streets after leaving the diner. His mind wandered, replaying the small kindness shown to him, the waitress's gentle smile, and the warmth that had made his morning brighter. For years, he had spent time helping others quietly, often unnoticed, and yet this simple gesture touched him in a way that few things had. He knew the world could be harsh, and sometimes, small acts like this were what made it bearable. But when he learned that the waitress had been fired for her kind act, a sense of anger and resolve settled in him. He couldn't ignore the injustice. He returned to his home, a large, stately residence filled with photographs and mementos of a life well lived. Despite his age, there was a sharpness in his mind, a careful attention to detail that made him both observant and decisive. He sat at a polished wooden desk and picked up his phone, dialing a number with calm authority. After a few moments, a voice answered on the other end. "I need your help," he said simply. "There has been an injustice, and it must be addressed." The voice responded with interest, as if expecting him to explain further, and he did. He recounted the story of the small diner, the waitress, and the cup of coffee. He described her kindness, her humanity, and the unfairness of the punishment she had received. His tone was measured, yet there was a quiet force behind it that left no doubt about the seriousness of his request. Within hours, a team of professionals was assembled. They listened carefully as he detailed the situation, asking questions and considering the best approach. They understood immediately that this was not just a matter of policy or procedure, but a moment where human decency had been punished instead of recognized. The man's determination was clear, and his instructions were precise. This needed to be handled in a way that corrected the wrong without unnecessary confrontation, and it needed to restore dignity to the waitress who had acted out of kindness. As they worked, he reflected on his own life. He had seen many moments of unfairness, many times when people who acted rightly were punished. He had learned that sometimes, the only way to correct an injustice was to step in personally. He remembered the times he had been helped by strangers, the quiet generosity that had shaped him, and he realized it was his turn to repay that spirit. Small gestures, after all, could grow into something powerful when matched with attention and action. The next day, he drove slowly through the streets, thinking about the diner and the young woman who had been dismissed. He knew the routine, the patterns, and the people who would be there. He wanted to arrive without creating unnecessary spectacle, but he also wanted to ensure that his presence conveyed the seriousness of the situation. He considered every detail, the timing, the way he would speak, the way he would present himself. There was a certain satisfaction in planning an action that was both fair and meaningful. Meanwhile, the waitress spent her day trying to move forward. She had applied to other jobs, but her mind kept drifting back to the diner and the old man. She thought about her actions and the consequences they had brought. There was a quiet sadness in her, but also a steady resolve. She had acted rightly, and she knew that. She believed that kindness should not be punished, and yet the world sometimes seemed to operate differently. She couldn't shake the thought that perhaps something larger was in motion, though she had no idea what form it would take. Back at his home, the elderly man went over the details once more. He wanted to ensure that everything was handled properly. He and his team discussed approaches, considering how the management might respond and how to maintain dignity for all involved. There was no rush, but there was urgency. He knew that the right moment could make a difference, that timing was critical in ensuring justice was achieved without unnecessary conflict. Late that afternoon, the old man prepared to leave. He wore a simple coat and hat, but there was a quiet authority in his presence that made it clear he was someone accustomed to being taken seriously. He entered his car, a sleek and understated vehicle, and began the short drive to the diner. His mind stayed focused on the goal: to restore fairness, to honor the woman's kindness, and to ensure that human decency was respected. As he approached the diner, he noticed the normal rhythms of the day. Customers chatting, the clatter of dishes, the smell of coffee drifting out the open windows. It was ordinary, familiar, and yet the moment was about to become extraordinary. He parked nearby, his presence unnoticed by most, and took a moment to gather his thoughts. He had planned every step carefully, yet there was still a human unpredictability in the situation that he could not fully control. The team he had assembled arrived shortly after, blending into the environment with professionalism. They were calm, efficient, and attentive to his instructions. He had chosen them because they understood not just legal and procedural matters, but the importance of handling a situation where dignity and fairness were at stake. They reviewed the plan one last time, ensuring that communication would be clear, and that their approach would support the waitress without causing unnecessary embarrassment or conflict. Inside the diner, the staff continued their work, unaware that the scene was about to change dramatically. Orders were taken, drinks were poured, and conversations continued. But there was a subtle tension in the air, a sense that something was shifting just beneath the surface. The old man and his team prepared quietly, ensuring that the impact of their arrival would be significant but measured, just enough to draw attention and convey seriousness without causing chaos. The waitress, meanwhile, had returned briefly to the diner to collect a few personal items she had left behind. She moved through the familiar space, her heart heavy with memories of the morning she had been dismissed. She thought about the customers she had served, the connections she had made, and the small acts of kindness that had defined her time there. She could feel the weight of absence, the way life continued around her even as her own story had been interrupted. Little did she know, the story was far from over. The elderly man signaled his team, and they moved strategically, entering the diner with quiet confidence. His presence alone commanded attention, a combination of dignity, authority, and purpose that drew eyes and focused minds. Staff and customers alike felt a shift in energy, a recognition that someone important had arrived. He walked with calm assurance, his gaze steady, and made his way to the center of the room. His team followed, attentive but unobtrusive, ready to act if needed, but primarily there to support and ensure fairness. At that moment, the waitress noticed the change. Something in the room had shifted, and her heart skipped a beat. She could not yet see him fully, but there was a presence, a force that felt purposeful and deliberate. She paused, her mind racing with questions and anticipation. She had no idea who he was or why he had come, but instinct told her that this moment was connected to her morning act of kindness. The elderly man stepped forward, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on the young woman who had served him so thoughtfully. He smiled faintly, a gesture of recognition and respect. The connection was immediate, unspoken but profound. In that instant, the waitress realized that her act had not gone unnoticed, and that someone had taken notice in a way she could never have imagined. It was a quiet, powerful validation of her humanity, a reminder that kindness, even when punished, could find its way back in unexpected ways. The diner had returned to its usual rhythm when the old man's car pulled up outside. The chime above the door went unnoticed as a few customers glanced briefly at the entrance, expecting nothing unusual. Then, a sleek limousine parked quietly by the curb, its polished exterior reflecting the morning sun. A sense of anticipation hung in the air, though most patrons remained unaware of the significance of the arrival. Inside the limousine, the old man adjusted his coat, his expression calm but purposeful. His team of professionals moved with quiet efficiency, ready to ensure that the moment would be handled with precision and care. As he stepped out, the sunlight caught the edges of his gray hair, and he moved with a dignity that seemed to command attention. Staff members who had been busy with orders paused, noticing the sudden presence of someone who exuded authority. The elderly man walked slowly toward the entrance, his team following discreetly but with eyes attentive to every detail. Customers who looked up felt an unspoken shift in the atmosphere, a sense that something important was about to happen. Inside, the waitress was arranging chairs, her hands shaking slightly with anticipation she didn't fully understand. She had been notified that someone was coming by a brief message from a friend, but she had no idea who it might be. As the door opened and the elderly man entered, accompanied by his team, her heart skipped a beat. There was an immediate recognition, not just of him but of the purpose and intent in his presence. He scanned the diner, his gaze calm but precise, until it rested on her. She felt a mixture of relief, curiosity, and awe. The old man approached the counter with measured steps, his team flanking him, ready to support but not intrude. He nodded slightly to the staff and customers, acknowledging their presence without disrupting the flow of the diner. His eyes held a quiet firmness, a determination to set things right without creating unnecessary tension. The waitress moved closer, unsure of what to say or do, but sensing that this was a moment she would never forget. He spoke softly but with clarity. "I understand what happened yesterday," he began, his voice calm yet commanding attention. "I was the customer you showed kindness to. I know you acted from your heart, and it is clear that you did not deserve the treatment you received." The waitress felt a lump form in her throat, her emotions a mixture of relief and gratitude. She nodded silently, unable to find words, her hands clasped together. His team began to outline the details of what had transpired, presenting facts to the management with professionalism and tact. The manager, initially taken aback, listened closely, realizing the gravity of the situation. There was a moment of silence, the weight of accountability settling in. The customers, curious, watched as the conversation unfolded, sensing that something meaningful was taking place beyond the ordinary flow of service and coffee orders. The old man continued, emphasizing the importance of kindness, integrity, and fairness. He spoke of human decency, of small gestures that could have a profound impact, and of the responsibility that came with positions of authority. His words were deliberate, intended to educate and correct rather than intimidate. The waitress watched, feeling a sense of validation that went beyond anything she had hoped for. Her act of kindness, simple and sincere, had been acknowledged in a way that restored not just her standing, but her faith in the value of compassion. The manager, now visibly moved, offered a sincere apology. He admitted that the reaction to the initial gesture had been too harsh, a rigid enforcement of policy that failed to consider the human element. The old man nodded, acknowledging the apology, and the conversation shifted toward reconciliation. Arrangements were made to reinstate the waitress, ensuring that she would not be penalized for her choice to act kindly. There was a tangible sense of relief, a quiet victory for fairness and empathy. Customers began to understand the significance of the moment, some whispering to each other, others quietly expressing approval. The atmosphere, once filled with ordinary chatter, now carried a sense of shared recognition that something unusual and important had occurred. The waitress felt a surge of emotion, a mix of gratitude, pride, and disbelief. She had acted out of a genuine desire to do good, and now the world had responded in kind, reinforcing her belief that acts of kindness mattered, even when they were challenged. The old man took a moment to speak directly to the waitress. "Your kindness did not go unnoticed. You reminded us all that small gestures have the power to change lives." She nodded, tears forming at the corners of her eyes, feeling a deep connection with someone who had recognized the value of her actions. It was more than just reinstatement. It was affirmation that doing the right thing, even when difficult, had a place in the world. As the conversation concluded, the old man and his team prepared to leave. He offered a final nod of encouragement to the staff and the waitress, leaving behind a sense of resolution and dignity. The customers, now fully aware of the story, shared quiet murmurs of admiration, recognizing the extraordinary nature of what had occurred. The diner returned to its normal rhythm, but the impact of the event lingered, a subtle but lasting reminder of the power of compassion and the importance of standing up for what is right. The waitress returned to her duties, but her perspective had shifted. She carried herself with renewed confidence, her actions reinforced by the acknowledgement she had received. She interacted with customers with the same warmth and care as before, but now with an added sense of validation. Her experience had taught her that kindness could be challenged, but it could also inspire change in unexpected ways. The old man's arrival had transformed a simple diner into a space where justice, recognition, and humanity converged. The staff and customers had witnessed a story unfold that went beyond coffee and meals. A story about values, integrity, and the quiet but profound impact of human connection. The waitress's act of generosity, initially punished, had ultimately become a lesson in fairness and empathy for everyone present. As the day progressed, the waitress reflected on the events with a sense of calm and purpose. She realized that while life often presented challenges and unfair situations, the choices to act with kindness and integrity were never wasted. Each small gesture had the potential to ripple outward, creating moments of recognition, connection, and positive change. The diner, once ordinary, now felt imbued with a sense of significance, a reminder that human decency could prevail even in unexpected circumstances. By the evening, the story had already begun to spread quietly among the local community. People discussed the event with a mixture of surprise and admiration, recognizing that the waitress's simple act of kindness had sparked a series of actions that reinforced the importance of empathy and fairness. Social media posts, messages between friends, and word-of-mouth stories all carried the tale, highlighting the extraordinary outcome of an ordinary morning. The waitress closed the diner that night, her heart light despite the challenges she had faced. She reflected on the events of the past 2 days, understanding that her life had been touched in a profound way by an act that had cost her so little, but had ultimately brought her recognition and a renewed sense of purpose. She felt gratitude not only for the old man but also for the reminder that compassion and humanity could make a difference, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. Outside, the lights of the diner glowed warmly against the night, a beacon of the kindness and fairness that had been restored within its walls. The old man, back in his limousine, drove away with a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had helped right a wrong and reinforced the value of empathy. The waitress, now reinstated, carried the lessons of the day with her, understanding that small acts of generosity and courage could have far-reaching effects, shaping not just her own life but the lives of everyone around her. The day after the dramatic events, the diner felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from the walls themselves. Customers trickled in, chatting and laughing, and the waitress moved among them with a renewed sense of purpose. She had been reinstated, her position restored, but more than that, she carried with her a deep sense of validation. The old man's recognition had not just corrected a wrong. It had reminded her why she chose to act with kindness in the first place. Word of the story spread quickly. Locals told their friends and families about the waitress who had been fired for offering a cup of coffee to an elderly man and the surprising way justice had arrived. The tale became a topic of conversation in cafes, on social media, and in offices across town. People marveled at the idea that a simple act of generosity could ripple outward and inspire action, touching the lives of many and reinforcing the importance of empathy in everyday life. The waitress found herself approached by customers and neighbors who wanted to offer congratulations and share their admiration. Some spoke of their own experiences with unfair treatment, expressing gratitude that someone had taken a stand for fairness and compassion. Others simply wanted to acknowledge her humanity, reminding her that her actions mattered far beyond what she might have imagined. Each encounter was a quiet reminder that kindness, though sometimes challenged, carried its own rewards. Meanwhile, the old man continued his life with quiet satisfaction, knowing he had acted in a way that restored justice and dignity. He did not seek recognition or fame. His goal had always been to ensure fairness and to support the young woman whose simple gesture of compassion had set this chain of events into motion. His presence had changed not just her life, but also the environment of the diner, reinforcing the idea that humanity and empathy could be honored even in the most ordinary places. The waitress returned to her work with a renewed sense of confidence. Each interaction with a customer, each cup of coffee poured, carried with it a reminder of the impact of her actions. She treated every customer with the same warmth and attention as before, but now there was an added sense of purpose, a subtle strength in knowing that doing the right thing could inspire recognition and change. She had learned that kindness, when guided by sincerity and courage, had a lasting effect that could reach far beyond a single moment. Her colleagues, who had witnessed the events unfold, began to treat her with a newfound respect. They saw not only her commitment to her work but also the depth of her character, the way she chose to act from the heart even when it came with personal risk. The team's dynamics shifted subtly, infused with an awareness that fairness and empathy were not just ideals, but actions that could be observed, practiced, and valued. The diner became more than a place to serve meals. It became a space where people could see integrity and kindness in action. As days passed, the story continued to ripple through the community. Local news outlets picked up the tale, highlighting the unusual sequence of events and the human-centered lessons it carried. Readers were drawn to the idea that a small act of generosity had not only been recognized but had been defended in such a striking way. Comments poured in from people who had been inspired to act with more compassion in their own lives, reminding the waitress and the community that empathy could be contagious. The waitress began to reflect on her experience with a sense of calm and wisdom. She realized that life often presented moments of challenge and unfairness, but the choices she made in those moments defined not only her character, but also the influence she had on the world around her. She understood that kindness might not always be immediately rewarded, and that sometimes, doing the right thing required courage and patience. But when those acts were acknowledged and respected, the impact could be profound and far-reaching. In the diner, regular customers noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. Conversations carried a warmth that had been there before, but now it was infused with the awareness that this was a place where actions mattered, where integrity could be witnessed and celebrated. The story of the waitress and the elderly man became a quiet emblem of hope and justice, a narrative that reminded everyone that even small gestures could carry significant weight. The old man returned occasionally, always discreetly, checking in to see how the waitress was doing. Their encounters were brief but meaningful, filled with mutual respect and understanding. He did not seek attention, and she did not expect recognition, yet the bond formed through that single act of kindness and its consequences became a quiet testament to the power of human connection. The waitress found that her work had gained a new dimension, a layer of meaning that went beyond the simple routines of serving food and drinks. As the weeks passed, the diner continued to thrive, not just because of the quality of its food or the efficiency of its service, but because it had become a space where humanity was celebrated. Customers felt the warmth and sincerity of the staff, inspired by the story that had unfolded within those walls. The waitress, once facing the sting of unfair treatment, now carried the knowledge that her choices had mattered in ways she could never have predicted. The story concluded not with fanfare, but with quiet affirmation. Justice had been restored, kindness had been recognized, and the lives of those involved had been touched in meaningful ways. The waitress understood that her experience was a reminder to continue acting with integrity, that every choice carried weight, and that even small acts of empathy could spark change. The diner remained a place of warmth, not just because of the food and coffee, but because of the values that had been reaffirmed within its walls. In the end, the waitress carried forward the lessons she had learned. She treated every customer with care, acted with courage in moments of challenge, and understood the ripple effect of her decisions. The old man's presence remained a symbol of justice and validation, reminding her and the community that acts of kindness, even when challenged, could inspire recognition and create lasting impact. Her life and the diner's environment had been enriched, leaving behind a narrative of hope, empathy, and the enduring value of human decency.